She had no date, no designer dress, and no place at that wedding. Olivia Bennet was just a florist, invited as a +1, sitting quietly at a forgotten table, trying not to be seen. But when Liam Westbrook, the groom's mysterious millionaire friend, asked if the seat beside her was taken, she never imagined how that simple moment would begin to rewrite everything she believed about love, worth, and belonging. But what happened after that? No one in that room could have predicted. If this story touches your heart, leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and tell us in the comments, where are you watching from? Your presence is what keeps this space alive. The grand marble steps of the Whitmore Grand Hotel stretched before Olivia Bennet like the entrance to a different world, one where she clearly didn't belong. Her breath caught for a moment as she looked up at the crystal chandeliers glittering through the tall glass windows and the valet men dressed better than anyone she'd ever known. She adjusted the strap of her vintage blue dress, an elegant but clearly modest piece she had found in a second-hand boutique, and inhaled slowly, bracing herself for a night she already regretted saying yes to. Her friend Sophia had insisted she come. "It'll be fun, Olivia. Everyone who's anyone will be there," she'd said, twirling with excitement. But now, walking in alone while Sophia dashed off to greet someone near the photo booth, Olivia felt anything but fun. The reception hall was a spectacle of golden light, ivory roses, and clinking champagne glasses. Waiters glided across the floor with polished trays, and the guests, draped in designer gowns and tuxedos, moved like stars in their own movie. Olivia, with her simple curls pinned loosely and her ballet flats clicking quietly on the polished floor, felt like a background extra who had wandered onto the wrong set. "Table 9, she murmured, holding the ivory card with shaky fingers. Her seat was tucked away near the far end of the room, half shielded by one of the massive floral installations. While other tables buzzed with chatter and laughter, hers sat in near silence, occupied only by an empty chair and a small, flickering candle. Perfect. Sophia had already disappeared. No surprise there. As soon as they arrived, she had spotted the charming wedding photographer and vanished into a flurry of giggles and flirtation. Olivia had barely had time to say, "Save me a seat." She sat down slowly, smoothing the fabric over her lap and pretending to read the menu card. Her stomach twisted, not from hunger, but from the sharp edge of alienation. It was a feeling she knew too well, being present but invisible, dressed but out of place, surrounded but painfully alone. The string quartet began playing a soft version of La Vie en Rose, and Olivia allowed herself a small smile. At least the music was beautiful. It gave her something to focus on that wasn't the growing ache in her chest. She glanced around, watching the people swirl around her like a waltz she didn't know the steps to. Every now and then her gaze caught on the opulence, the glimmering heels, the sparkling diamond earrings, the effortless grace of people who had grown up in places like this. "What am I doing here?" she thought, folding her hands in her lap. "I should have just stayed home and repotted my orchids." But somewhere beneath the insecurity, there was a quiet strength in her, a resilience born from years of making the most out of very little. Olivia wasn't weak. She was just unfamiliar with this kind of world. As she sipped her water, trying not to notice the curious glances some guests shot her way, she felt the weight of her solitude settle in deeper. The flicker of hope she'd held, that maybe this night would be different, dimmed with each passing minute. Until it happened. A voice, low and composed, suddenly broke through her mental fog. "Is this seat taken?" She looked up, and what she saw made her heartbeat do something it hadn't done in a long, long time. He stood tall, poised, with a tailored black suit that fit him like a second skin. His tie was undone slightly at the neck, just enough to give the impression that he was too effortless to care. His hair was swept back in a way that made it impossible to guess whether he'd just left a boardroom or stepped off a yacht. But it wasn't the suit or the striking profile that unsettled her. It was the eyes. They weren't looking at her the way most people did. Not with pity, not with amusement, just presence. She blinked, unsure if her silence had lasted too long. No, it's free," she finally said, motioning to the empty chair. He smiled as he took the seat beside her, crossing one ankle over his knee and glancing briefly around the room like he was avoiding someone. "You looked like the safest table in the room," he said with a soft chuckle. Olivia's lips curled slightly despite herself. "That's because this table is practically invisible." He turned to her, his smile widening. "Even better." She looked down, embarrassed by how warm her face suddenly felt. "What's your name?" he asked. "Olivia. Olivia Bennett." "Liam," he replied. "Liam Westbrook." The name didn't ring a bell, but the way he said it, simple without a trace of ego, made her curious. He extended a hand to shake hers. She accepted, and for a brief moment, there was a current in the air. The kind that makes time pause just long enough for the soul to notice. And just like that, something had shifted. He leaned back in his chair, his gaze scanning the room again. "You don't look like you're enjoying this party." Olivia laughed lightly. "Is it that obvious?" "A little, but in a good way." Their eyes met again, this time for a second longer. Somewhere in the distance, the couple had begun their first dance, and the lights dimmed slightly, casting soft glows over the white roses and gold-trimmed napkins. Olivia turned her gaze back toward Liam, and for the first time that night, she didn't feel like a stranger at someone else's celebration. But then he said something unexpected, casual but curious. "I'm hiding from someone," he murmured. She raised an eyebrow. "From who?" He smirked. "You wouldn't believe me if I told you." And just like that, the night was no longer predictable. Not for Olivia, not for him. And what began as a lonely evening in an unfamiliar place was suddenly becoming the beginning of something that neither of them could quite name. Not yet. Liam Westbrook was not the kind of man who enjoyed weddings. There was something uncomfortable about the rehearsed formality, the tight-lipped smiles between distant relatives, the small talk about honeymoon destinations. But he had promised his best friend, the groom, that he would be there, and Liam always kept his promises. Still, dodging the bride's grandmother, who had been trying to match him with various promising young ladies since the welcome toast, felt like a good enough reason to wander through the reception in search of refuge. And that's when he noticed the woman at table 9. She didn't look bored. She looked restrained, like someone who carried a quiet strength, but was trying not to take up too much space in a room that wasn't built for her. Her navy blue dress was simple, yet elegant. Her hair was pinned back in a way that revealed a calm, observant face. Liam hesitated for a second before approaching. There was something about her that pulled him in, not for amusement, not for conquest, but out of genuine curiosity. Maybe it was the fact that she was the only one not trying to impress anyone. "Is this seat taken?" he asked, a slight smile on his lips. And there she was, Olivia Bennett, a woman who, with just a few words, was already beginning to unravel everything Liam thought he knew. She looked surprised by the approach, but not insecure. There was a flicker in her eyes, a quiet alertness of someone who knew how to protect herself, yet she still let him sit. The conversation started with casual things, the music, the decor, the untouched cake. But then something rare happened. Liam stopped talking. He listened. When she mentioned her work as a florist, he didn't pretend to be interested. He was interested. "You work with flowers?" he asked sincerely. "Like all the flowers in the world?" Olivia laughed softly. "Not even close. I just try to keep them alive one more day. That's already way more than I could do." "Have you tried?" "No. I'd probably kill a cactus." She smiled, and in that smile there was sweetness, but also a hint of sorrow, as if she wasn't used to conversations like this, to being truly heard. Liam leaned back in his chair. "I'm hiding from the bride's grandmother. She's trying to marry me off to the daughter of her best friend, who, by the way, is clearly in love with herself." Olivia raised an eyebrow. "And this is your strategy? Sit with a stranger and pretend we're a couple?" "It works better than you'd think." She chuckled again, this time with less defense in her voice. Slowly, the minutes slipped by unnoticed. Liam shared that he hated expensive wine and preferred orange juice. Olivia admitted she'd never left the state. He talked about his obsession with 1960s jazz. She revealed she talked to herself while arranging flowers. There was something strange and beautiful about the moment. He didn't feel like a powerful man, and she didn't feel like someone who didn't belong. She caught herself watching his hands as he spoke, strong, precise yet gentle. And Liam in turn noticed how Olivia's eyes lit up when she talked about flowers, as if they were her old friends, and each color held a secret. "So," he asked, tilting his head slightly, "how did you end up at this glamorous event?" She smiled faintly. "I'm just a +1. My friend Sophia dragged me here. She ditched me the moment we walked in." "Charming." "She does that a lot." "Well," he said, his voice lowering just enough to feel like a secret, "then I'm glad she did." She didn't respond right away. There was a subtle shift in the air between them, like something unsaid had just brushed past both of them. She looked away for a second, her fingers grazing the edge of her glass. "You really don't seem like you fit in here," she said quietly, as if testing him. Liam smiled. "That makes two of us." And somehow those 5 words felt like the beginning of a different kind of night. One not defined by crystal chandeliers or champagne toasts, but by something real. Something unspoken but present, like a current running under the table, invisible to everyone else. Then, as if drawn to her honesty, he asked, "If you could be anywhere else right now, where would you be?" Olivia didn't hesitate. In a greenhouse, barefoot, hands in the soil, surrounded by orchids and silence. Liam's eyebrows lifted in amused surprise. "That's oddly specific. It's my favorite place in the world. I go there when the world feels too loud." Liam leaned closer, the candlelight flickering between them. "Then maybe I've been in the wrong places all along." Their eyes met again, and this time neither of them looked away. Somewhere across the room, a cork popped. Laughter burst from the main table. The string quartet launched into another piece. But at table 9, the world had narrowed into something much smaller, just the space between two strangers discovering moment by moment that they were no longer strangers. Liam took a slow sip of water, set the glass down, and smiled. "I'm glad I came tonight." And Olivia, without thinking, said softly, "Me too." But neither of them could have guessed what this conversation, this seat at the edge of a wedding, was about to set in motion. There was something about the way Liam looked at her. Not as if he was trying to figure her out, but as if he was simply present, genuinely interested in every word that came out of her mouth. And that was new for Olivia. After so many years of being overlooked, of being the quiet one in the corner while everyone else took up space, the experience of being seen, truly seen, was disarming. They were still seated at table 9, but the room around them had faded into the background. The clink of glasses, the bursts of laughter, the buzz of celebration, it all blurred into a soft hum, as if the world had turned down its volume to let their conversation breathe. "What's the best thing about being a florist?" Liam asked, resting his chin on his hand, eyes locked on hers. Olivia tilted her head, considering the question. "The morning silence," she said. "When the city is still half asleep and I'm opening boxes of fresh blooms, there's this scent, earthy, cool, full of promise. It feels like a new beginning every day." Liam smiled, the corners of his eyes crinkling. "That's poetic," she laughed, tucking a loose strand of hair behind her ear. "Or cheesy." "No, it's real." He paused. "I don't get to start my mornings that way. Mine usually begin with 30 unread emails and a meeting I didn't want." Olivia arched an eyebrow. "You sound very important." "I'm very scheduled," he replied, amused. "But sometimes I wonder if the important things are the ones I keep pushing aside." The way he said it made her pause. There was something layered in his voice, something just shy of regret. "What would you do if you weren't scheduled?" she asked gently. Liam chuckled, glancing at the flickering candle between them. "I don't even know. Maybe learn how not to kill a cactus." She laughed again, and it was the kind of laugh that warmed her chest from the inside out. There was no flirting in the traditional sense, no rehearsed charm or flashy compliments, but there was sincerity and curiosity. The kind that builds bridges between two people who didn't expect to connect. "I've always thought," Liam said slowly, "that some people grow up learning how to shine in rooms like this, and others, they bring their own light, even if they don't realize it." Olivia blinked, caught off guard by the softness in his voice. "And which kind am I?" she asked, not quite daring to believe he meant her. Liam didn't hesitate. "You're the second kind. For a moment she didn't know what to say. Compliments usually made her uncomfortable. They often came wrapped in expectation or insincerity. But this one settled somewhere deeper. "You don't seem like someone who usually says things like that," she said, her voice low. "I'm not," he admitted. "But you don't seem like someone who usually ends up alone at a table either." She smiled, but this time it didn't reach her eyes. "I usually do," she said quietly. "I don't exactly blend in." There was a pause. Not awkward, just honest. "I think that's the point," Liam said. "You're not supposed to blend in." They sat in silence for a beat, and in that silence, something else was building. Not tension, but presence. A quiet awareness of each other. A comfort that came not from familiarity, but from the absence of pretense. Then, in a shift of tone, Olivia leaned forward with a small grin. "So, tell me, who exactly are you hiding from?" Liam laughed, rubbing the back of his neck. "The bride's grandmother. She's on a mission to marry me off before dessert. I'm honored to be your escape plan." "Oh, this is serious," he said, mock grave. "I've avoided 3 introductions and a dance already. If she catches me again, she'll start listing family bloodlines." Olivia laughed so hard she had to cover her mouth, and Liam's eyes lit up at the sound. "I never expected this," she admitted, once she caught her breath. "What? To be laughing at a wedding with someone like you?" He leaned back, raising an eyebrow. "Someone like me, you know," she gestured toward him. "Well-dressed, confident, a bit out of place but pretending not to be." He tilted his head. "You're very perceptive." She shrugged. "I work with flowers all day. People aren't much different." "Is that so? Most people pretend to be more open than they are, but they close up fast when something real shows up." He grew quiet at that, and Olivia noticed the way his fingers slowly turned his water glass, as if her words had stirred something. "I think that's why I sat here," he finally said. "You weren't pretending." The way he said it made something shift inside her. They didn't talk about past relationships, or traumas, or dreams. Not yet. But what passed between them was more intimate than any small talk ever could be. It was the kind of conversation that bypassed the surface and sank quietly into the heart. After a few more minutes, the music shifted to a slower tempo. A classic ballad, the kind that begged for a dance. Liam turned to her. "Do you dance?" Olivia's cheeks flushed. "Not well, and not in heels." "I can work with that," he said with a grin. "Would you give it a try with me?" Her breath caught. She wasn't the girl who got asked to dance, not in rooms like this. But Liam was already standing, extending a hand toward her, waiting, not with pressure, but with invitation. And before she could talk herself out of it, Olivia reached for his hand and stood up. As their fingers touched, she felt it again, that subtle jolt, like recognition without reason. She didn't know what was happening, or where this was going. But for the first time in a long time, she wasn't afraid to find out. The moment Olivia's fingers touched Liam's, a current moved between them, subtle but undeniable. It wasn't dramatic or theatrical. It was quiet, like the soft hush of air before rain. And it made her hesitate for a heartbeat, but his touch was steady, warm and patient. He didn't pull her, he simply waited, letting her decide. And she did. He led her gently through the crowd, weaving past tables and candlelit conversations until they reached the dance floor, where soft golden lights spilled down from the chandelier above. A few couples already swayed to the slow rhythm of the string quartet, their silhouettes blending into one another like gentle waves. "I should warn you," Olivia said with a nervous laugh. "I haven't danced since my cousin's quinceañera, and I stepped on her dress." Liam smiled, placing one hand lightly on her waist and taking her other hand in his. "Then I promise not to wear a gown tonight." Her laughter eased her shoulders, and in that moment, she let go of the weight she didn't know she'd been carrying. The music wrapped around them, soft violins and piano chords creating a cocoon of sound that shut out the rest of the world. Liam's movements were smooth and natural, not showy, but sure. He led her without dominance. Every step was a conversation, not a command. Olivia followed tentatively at first, her feet unsure, her breath shallow, but something about his calm presence helped her find her rhythm. She wasn't dancing. She was being held. "You're a lot better at this than you let on," he murmured. "I'm trying not to overthink it," she replied. "Good. That's where the magic hides." Their eyes met again, this time longer, deeper, and for a moment, neither looked away. It wasn't attraction in the obvious sense. It was more like recognition, a sense that something rare was happening, something that didn't need to be spoken to be understood. Olivia's pulse slowed. Her body began to move with his, the tension in her spine melting with each gentle sway. Her hand fit perfectly in his, as though it belonged there all along. She looked up at him, and in the soft candlelight, she noticed a quiet sadness in his eyes. It wasn't dramatic. It was just there, a trace of loneliness hidden beneath the ease of his smile. "You don't seem like someone who dances much either," she whispered. "I don't," he admitted. "But sometimes the right person makes it easy." The words landed softly, but deeply. And Olivia felt it, that fragile shift when something platonic begins to lean into something else, when safety starts to feel like desire, when stillness becomes charged. She didn't know what to do with the fluttering sensation in her chest. She hadn't felt it in years, not since before she learned to guard herself from disappointment, not since she'd decided that romantic things like this, ballrooms, slow dances, strangers with kind eyes, only happened in books. But here she was, and here he was. As they moved in slow circles, Liam's thumb brushed gently over the back of her hand, barely there, just enough to be noticed, just enough to send a ripple down her spine. The world felt smaller, quieter, closer. He leaned in, his voice low enough that only she could hear. "You surprise me." "How so?" "You're not afraid of silence." She smiled. "Some people only speak to fill it. And you?" "I listen to what silence says." Liam's eyes didn't leave hers. "And what is it saying now?" She held his gaze, heart pounding. "That something's changing." He didn't respond. He didn't need to. Because in that moment, under the soft glow of chandeliers and the tender pull of the music, something was changing. It was in the way their hands held a second too long, in the way her head tilted just slightly closer to his chest, in the way his breath caught when she smiled up at him without fear. For the first time in what felt like forever, Olivia felt seen. Not for what she looked like or where she came from, but for something deeper, for who she was beneath the surface. And Liam. Liam felt safe. Not the kind of safety money buys, but the kind he didn't know he'd been craving. The kind that comes with honesty, with being known and accepted without explanation. As the music began to fade, neither of them moved to stop. Their bodies still swayed in a silent rhythm, lingering in the moment, even as the notes disappeared. When the song finally ended, Liam didn't let go right away. His hand remained on her lower back, his other hand still cradling hers. Olivia looked up at him, lips slightly parted, unsure of what came next. But Liam only whispered, "Thank you for this." She didn't answer. She couldn't. Her throat tightened with an emotion she didn't have words for yet. Instead, she nodded. A simple, quiet nod. But it said everything. Around them, applause erupted for the newlyweds, and the dance floor filled again. The moment passed, but not entirely. As they made their way back to table 9, shoulder brushing against shoulder, Olivia felt something blooming where uncertainty had once lived. She didn't know who this man truly was. She didn't know why he had chosen to sit beside her, but she knew with the certainty of someone who listens to silence that this was not the end of their story. It was just the beginning. After the dance, something had changed. Not dramatically, not in words, but in the air between them. Olivia felt it in the way Liam walked beside her, quietly attentive, never rushing, never leading too far ahead. Back at table 9, they sat again, but it no longer felt like a hiding spot. It felt like a pocket of calm in a room full of curated chaos. Liam glanced toward the center of the ballroom and chuckled softly as the bride's grandmother scanned the crowd, no doubt hunting for him. "I think she's reloading," he whispered to Olivia, leaning close enough that his voice warmed her skin. She laughed, hiding her smile behind her fingertips. "I think you've officially become a target." He tilted his head toward her. "Worth it." Olivia felt her heart pause for half a second. She told herself not to read into it, but his eyes lingered just long enough to make her wonder if he meant something more. It was then, in the calm between songs, that she started noticing the details. First, his watch. A sleek, minimal design, but unmistakably high-end. She didn't know brands, but the craftsmanship was impossible to miss. Second, the way the waitstaff interacted with him. Not just polite, but deferential. Subtle nods, soft smiles, and occasional glances of recognition. Then there was the couple that passed by their table, an older man and woman in black tie elegance. The man clapped Liam on the shoulder in passing. "Good to see you here, Westbrook. Thought you might ghost this one too." Liam gave a polite smile. "Couldn't skip this one." Olivia blinked. Westbrook. It wasn't a common name, and the way the man had said it, it wasn't casual. It carried weight, like people knew it, like they expected Liam to carry something with it. She turned back to him, studying the quiet ease in his expression. He noticed her gaze. "Something on my face?" he asked playfully. "No," she said slowly. "I just realized you never actually told me what you do." Liam smiled, but it was measured. "I didn't, did I?" She waited, eyes narrowed in curiosity. "I work in consulting," he said, taking a sip of his drink. Olivia leaned forward. "That's vague." "It's supposed to be." She narrowed her eyes further. "You're being deliberately mysterious." "I like hearing about your work better," he said, deflecting smoothly. "Flowers are much more interesting than contracts and deadlines." She smiled but didn't let it go. "So you're hiding something?" "Maybe. Or maybe I just like being unknown for a night." There it was again. That tension between simplicity and something else, something carefully held back. As the night wore on, she kept noticing the contrasts. Liam was at ease with every guest who approached, but never gave away too much. He danced with Olivia but declined an invitation from a socialite in red. He laughed easily, yet avoided every camera that circled the room. When dessert arrived, small plates of golden crème brûlée, he gently slid his toward her. "Try this. Trust me." She scooped a bite, and her eyes widened. "Okay, I trust you." He smiled, softer this time. "Dangerous thing to say to someone you barely know." "Not if I know what matters." He studied her a moment, as if trying to decide whether she really meant that, and he seemed to like the answer he found. Just then, a man in a sharp charcoal suit approached, pausing by Liam's chair. "Mr. Westbrook," he said under his breath, nodding politely to Olivia. "Sorry to interrupt, but there's a quick call. London office. It'll just take a moment." Liam's jaw tightened for a split second, barely noticeable, but Olivia saw it. "Tell them I'll return it in the morning." The man hesitated. "They insisted." Liam glanced at Olivia and then back. 1 minute. When he stood, Olivia saw it again. The subtle ripple his presence caused. Guests glanced his way, whispered behind napkins. The kind of attention someone important is used to but never seeks. She watched as he stepped outside the ballroom, his posture shifting slightly, shoulders squaring, expression sharpening. He wasn't the same man who danced with her to violins. He looked in command, and suddenly the pieces began to fit. She turned the name over in her mind. Westbrook. The floral shop sometimes arranged bouquets for downtown buildings. She remembered overhearing a delivery driver once say something about Westbrook Holdings, a real estate empire, luxury properties, tech investments. Could it be? The idea seemed absurd, but the signs were hard to ignore. When Liam returned a few minutes later, his smile was intact, but there was a trace of something else in his eyes. Fatigue, maybe. Or restraint. "Sorry about that," he said, sitting back down. "No problem," Olivia replied, trying to match his casual tone. He looked at her closely, and for a second it was as if he sensed the shift. "You okay?" he asked. "Just trying to figure out who I'm really having crème brûlée with," she said lightly, but her tone carried more meaning than her words. He tilted his head, exhaled through his nose, and gave a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Just a guy who likes flowers, and dancing with strangers who aren't really strangers anymore." The words were soft, but Olivia heard the deflection. Clearer now. She nodded, not pushing further, but something inside her had shifted. He wasn't just the charming man with the untied bow tie and the warm laugh. He was someone with layers, someone hiding behind simplicity, maybe even hiding from something. And still, as he reached across the table and gently touched her hand, Olivia didn't pull away. Because whatever secrets he carried, she wasn't ready to walk away. Not yet. The next morning, Olivia woke up with a strange ache in her chest, soft, unfamiliar, and almost sweet. She sat at the edge of her bed, still half-dressed from the night before, staring at her worn flats on the floor and replaying every second of the evening in her mind. She'd gone to that wedding, expecting to be invisible. But instead she danced, she laughed, she connected with Liam Westbrook. She still didn't fully understand who he was, but she knew how he made her feel, and that mattered more than any last name. Her phone buzzed. Unknown number. "Hey, this is Liam. I know it's early, but dinner tonight?" She stared at the screen for a moment, heart catching in her throat. He remembered, and he wanted to see her again. Fingers trembling slightly, she typed back, "I'd like that." By 5 o'clock, Olivia was nervously pacing inside her apartment, second-guessing everything she owned. She pulled dress after dress from her tiny closet. Too casual, too formal, too colorful, too plain. What does one wear when the man picking her up might also own half the skyline? She settled on a simple deep green dress, soft fabric, elegant neckline. Her hair was loosely curled and her makeup just enough to feel polished, but her nerves remained untouched by mascara. At exactly 6:30, there was a knock at the door, but it wasn't Liam. It was a chauffeur dressed in a sharp black suit, standing beside a sleek black sedan that gleamed beneath the setting sun. "Miss Bennett?" he asked with a kind smile. "Yes? I'm here on behalf of Mr. Westbrook." Mr. Westbrook. The way the name sounded from someone else's lips sent a ripple through her. She stepped into the car, her heartbeat rattling inside her ribs. The interior smelled of leather and bergamot. A soft playlist hummed from hidden speakers. She'd never been inside a car that quiet before. And then, just before she could lose herself in her spiraling thoughts, the door on the other side opened, and Liam slid in beside her. But this Liam was different. He wore a charcoal button-down, sleeves rolled casually at the wrists. No tie. His hair slightly tousled. He looked every bit the powerful man she now suspected him to be. Yet there was warmth in his eyes, familiarity. "Hey," he said, voice softer than the leather around them. "You look amazing." "You too," she replied, trying not to sound as breathless as she felt. "Though I expected you to be waiting somewhere dramatic, like the top of a skyscraper." He smiled. "We'll get to that eventually." The ride was quiet in the best way. No awkward chatter, no forced questions. Just the occasional glance, the almost smile when their eyes met, and the growing awareness that something delicate was unfolding. They pulled up to a modern high-rise building in Midtown. Olivia's breath caught as she looked up, glass and steel shimmering against the dusky sky. "This is where we're going?" Liam nodded. "I figured we'd skip the crowds. I hope that's okay. You brought me to your home?" "I wanted to cook," he said, then shrugged. "And I wanted to talk without interruptions." The elevator ride to the top floor felt endless. Her fingers gripped her purse tighter than necessary. When the doors opened, Olivia stepped into a world she hadn't even imagined. Floor-to-ceiling windows bathed the open space in twilight. The city sprawled beneath them like a sea of stars. The apartment was modern, yes, but not cold. Books lined the shelves, a few framed photos of distant places, plants, real ones, by the windows, a hint of warmth in the understated design. "This is where you live," she whispered, stepping in like she might break something. "Where I sleep," Liam said, locking the door behind them. "I don't know if I'd call it living." She turned to him. "Then what do you call this?" "Convenient. Impressive. But not home." The honesty in his voice settled into her chest like a weight. This wasn't a show. He wasn't trying to impress her. He was showing her the truth. And she saw him. Not the CEO, not the man everyone seemed to watch, but the man who'd laughed over flowers and danced like no one was looking. In the open kitchen, he began preparing dinner, chopping fresh herbs, tossing pasta into a simmering pot. Olivia leaned against the counter, watching his every move. "You really can cook?" she asked. "I really can," he said. "My mother would have disowned me otherwise." She smiled. "Let me help. You're my guest. I'm a florist, I don't sit still." So they cooked. Together. She chopped while he stirred. They bumped elbows, laughed at small spills. He wiped a smudge of sauce from her cheek with the back of his hand, and her breath caught again. Not because of the touch, but because of how gentle it was. Dinner was served at the small table by the window, just the two of them, candlelight flickering, a bottle of wine untouched. They ate slowly, talked more. Olivia told him about growing up with her grandmother, about skipping prom to work an extra shift, about how arranging flowers felt like building hope with her hands. Liam listened with that same quiet focus. Then he shared things too, not business strategies or board meetings, but fragments of himself. How he used to sneak out of prep school just to breathe, how he hated his first company despite its success, how he sometimes dreamed of disappearing just to see who would come looking. The conversation stretched late into the evening, long after the plates had been cleared. And then, just when Olivia thought the night was winding down, Liam stood and extended his hand again. "Come see something." He led her to the balcony. The view took her breath away. Lights everywhere. Tiny pulses of life stretching into the horizon, and above it all, stars trying to compete. "I stand here when everything feels too much," he said quietly. "It reminds me that I'm small, and that small is good." Olivia turned to him, something tight and full rising in her chest. "You don't seem small." He looked at her, really looked. "You make me feel human." And in that suspended moment, no ballroom, no waiters, no audience, Olivia understood that what was happening between them wasn't fleeting. It was real, maybe fragile, maybe impossible, but real. The night air on the balcony was cooler than Olivia expected, brushing her skin like a question she didn't know how to answer. She stood beside Liam in silence, watching the city shimmer beneath them, 1,000 lives, 1,000,000 lights, all unaware of the quiet storm unraveling in her chest. Liam hadn't touched her again. He didn't need to. The space between them was already filled with a tension that pulsed louder than words. And Olivia, she didn't want to break it, not yet. She rested her hands on the glass railing, looking out. "It's beautiful," she murmured. Liam's voice came low beside her. "It's easy to forget that when you're always looking down at it." She turned to him slowly. The city lights reflected in his eyes, but there was something else there too. Hesitation, vulnerability, and maybe fear. "Liam," she said softly, "who are you?" It wasn't a challenge, it wasn't even doubt. It was the voice of someone ready to understand. He exhaled through his nose, hands in his pockets, as if bracing himself against a wind that didn't blow. "I was hoping I could keep this simple a little longer," he said. "But it's not simple," she replied. He nodded. "No, it's not." And then, without grand gestures or dramatic build-up, Liam began to tell her. "I'm the CEO of Westbrook Holdings," he said. "Technically speaking, I oversee multiple companies, real estate, investments, philanthropy. My family started it generations ago, and I inherited the crown, I guess." Olivia didn't speak. She didn't move. He looked at her. "It's not a secret. You could Google it and find a dozen interviews, Forbes profiles, articles that barely mention who I am, and obsess over what I own." She swallowed hard, her fingers curling slightly over the glass. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" He was quiet for a long beat. "Because I wanted you to see me before you saw that." His voice was gentle, but certain. The moment people know, everything shifts. Their eyes change, their words, their posture. "I didn't want that with you." She let that settle. The truth had a weight, but it wasn't crushing. It was clarifying. "I suspected," she said finally, eyes returning to the skyline. "Your watch, the way people spoke to you. That driver." He smiled faintly. "I was a little careless, wasn't I?" She shook her head. "You weren't hiding. You were just hoping." Liam turned fully toward her now, leaning on the railing with his elbows, close enough for her to feel the warmth radiating off his body. "I don't usually invite people into this space," he said. "Not into my home, not into this part of me." "And yet," she whispered, Here I am. He looked at her, really looked, the way people do when they stop pretending and finally allow themselves to be seen. I know we come from different worlds, Olivia, he said, and I don't expect you to be okay with all of it. But when I sat down beside you at that wedding, I didn't see a woman who was out of place. I saw someone who didn't pretend, who was present, who looked like she belonged in a way I haven't felt in years. Her throat tightened. She wanted to believe him. She really did. But there was a quiet storm inside her, the voice of every time she'd been told she wasn't enough, that she wasn't polished or educated in the right schools or dressed for the right rooms. She pulled away slightly. I'm just me, Liam. I don't know how to navigate any of this. I grew up with a grandmother who saved coupons and taught me how to stretch leftovers. I fix broken vases with glue. I iron dresses from thrift stores. I've never even flown first class. Good, he said, stepping closer, because I've flown first class my whole life, and I still feel like I'm crashing half the time. She let out a shaky laugh, surprised by the honesty. You're not what I expected. I'm not what anyone expects, he said, and maybe that's why I keep ending up alone. His words echoed into the night air, and Olivia felt them reach places inside her that had been quiet for too long. She turned to face him fully. Why me? He didn't flinch. Because when you speak, I listen, he said, because you don't pretend to be more than you are, and because when I'm with you I feel like I'm finally breathing. There it was. No games, no veils. And yet, Olivia still felt the weight of reality pressing in, not because she didn't trust him, but because she wasn't sure she trusted the world he came from, a world that had never made room for someone like her. He sensed her hesitance, stepped closer, and reached out, not forcefully, but with that same gentle certainty she'd come to recognize. His hand brushed hers. You don't have to make any decisions tonight. I just needed you to know the truth about who I am, about how I feel. Olivia didn't move for a moment. Then, slowly, she laced her fingers with his, and in that quiet gesture she gave him an answer. Not a promise, not a conclusion, but a beginning. 3 days after that night on the balcony, Olivia stood at the edge of a gravel driveway, surrounded by pine trees so tall they seemed to touch the sky. In front of her was a rustic wooden cabin nestled beside a still, glistening lake. The silence was complete. No horns, no chatter, no ticking clocks. Only birdsong, wind through the trees, and the soft lapping of water against the dock. She turned slowly to Liam, who was carrying a canvas bag in one hand and 2 fishing rods in the other. You weren't kidding, she whispered. He smiled. I told you it wasn't fancy. She laughed under her breath. Liam, this is the most peaceful place I've ever seen. He shrugged. It's where I come to remember I'm not a machine. They'd driven 3 hours north, no driver, no bodyguards, no suits. Just Liam in a hoodie and jeans, hair a little wild from the wind and eyes softer than she'd ever seen. Olivia had worn a sweater 2 sizes too big and boots that had seen better days. And yet, when he looked at her, she felt more beautiful than in any borrowed dress. Inside the cabin, everything smelled of cedar and old pages. There were books on every shelf, some worn, some pristine, and a fireplace waiting to be lit. The kitchen was small but stocked, and the windows opened to nothing but sky and water. It wasn't luxury, it was real. And Olivia felt her chest loosen, as if something that had been clenched there for years was finally beginning to release. They unpacked groceries, argued playfully about pancake toppings, and discovered, with much laughter, that Liam couldn't chop onions without tearing up like a child. When they sat down to dinner, simple pasta with mushrooms and garlic, they ate with their legs tucked beneath them, plates balanced in their laps, music playing from an old speaker in the corner. Do you ever bring anyone here? Olivia asked, dipping a piece of bread into the leftover sauce. Liam shook his head. No, never. She looked up. Why me? He didn't answer right away. Instead, he leaned back against the couch, eyes on her like she was a question he finally knew how to answer. Because with you I don't feel like I have to perform, he said, or edit myself or manage expectations. You let things be what they are, and you let me be what I am. Her throat tightened. I don't know what I am around you. she said softly. I feel like I'm learning everything again, including myself. That's a good place to start, he said. I don't want a perfect version of you. I want the real one, even when it's messy. Especially when it's messy. They didn't kiss. Not then. But something passed between them, a tenderness so deep it didn't need lips to speak. The next morning they took the old canoe out onto the lake. The water was still as glass, reflecting the sky like a secret. Olivia sat cross-legged at the bow, watching Liam row with slow, steady strokes. Tell me something no one knows, she said. Liam paused, oars resting. I'm scared of disappointing people. I carry that fear into every room. Olivia nodded. Same. But in my case, I'm scared no one notices if I fail. He looked at her for a long time. I notice. Later, they hiked through the woods, took photos on a disposable camera Liam had forgotten he owned, and sat by the fire, sipping tea and toasting marshmallows on sticks. He told her how he used to dream of being an architect. She told him she used to dream of having a garden big enough to get lost in. He showed her the scar on his wrist from a childhood fall. She told him about the bouquet she made for her mother's funeral, the one she still recreates in her shop every year, without telling anyone why. No one else had ever heard that story. As night fell, they sat wrapped in blankets, their shoulders pressed together, watching the stars. No one was watching. No one was judging. And Olivia realized she wasn't scared anymore. Not of Liam. Not of his world. Not of her place in it. She was exactly where she needed to be. I think I'm falling for you, she said, not as a confession but as a truth spoken into the quiet. Liam turned to her, his voice barely more than a breath. You're not alone. And when he kissed her, finally, gently, with reverence and heat, the world did not disappear. It opened. The invitation came folded inside a thick ivory envelope, with gold embossing and cursive lettering that almost shimmered under the light. Annual Westbrook Foundation Gala, in support of children's literacy initiatives. When Liam handed it to Olivia, her fingers trembled before even opening it. It's important to me, he said softly, but only if you feel ready. She hadn't answered right away. Because the truth was, she wasn't. She had never been to a gala, never stood in a room full of people with last names that opened doors, or worn a gown designed by someone with a Parisian name she couldn't pronounce. The idea of being watched, judged, whispered about, it curled around her chest like invisible vines. But then she remembered the cabin, the lake, the silence, the kiss, and how Liam had seen her in all her simplicity and never once tried to make her smaller or more. So she took a breath, nodded and said, "Okay, I'll go." What followed was a whirlwind. Liam insisted she didn't need anything but herself, but he also made one gentle suggestion. Let me help with the dress. At first, she refused. Then, when she saw the look in his eyes, not controlling but hopeful, she agreed. A stylist came the next day. Warm, kind, not the least bit intimidating. She didn't speak in fashion jargon or try to fix Olivia. She listened. Together, they chose a gown, deep navy blue, flowing silk, off the shoulder, with subtle embroidery of silver threads like constellations. It wasn't flashy, it wasn't loud. It was her, elevated, but still her. The night of the gala, Olivia stood in front of her mirror for a long time before stepping out. When Liam saw her, he didn't speak. He just stared, and then he walked toward her like he was approaching a sunrise. "You're breathtaking," he finally whispered. "You're not so bad yourself," she teased, eyes tracing the cut of his black tuxedo. But inside, her heart was racing. The car ride to the venue passed in silence, their fingers intertwined, her knuckles cold despite the heater. When they arrived at the ballroom, a massive chandelier-lit hall with marble floors and walls dripping in opulence, Olivia's breath caught. People turned. They always turned when Liam walked in, but this time they looked at her, too, and that was when the voice returned. "You don't belong here. You're pretending. They'll see right through you." She stiffened, but Liam, sensing the shift, leaned down and whispered, "Just look at me." So she did, and it helped. He introduced her, not as a guest, not as a friend, not as someone he was seeing, but simply "This is Olivia." No need for explanation. No apology in his tone. Just pride. She spoke with donors, smiled at guests, even answered questions about her work. At first her voice trembled, then slowly it began to steady, until someone asked, "And where did you two meet?" Olivia looked at Liam. He smiled. "At a wedding," she said. "Wrong table, right person." People laughed, and something inside her unlocked. At one point, Liam was pulled aside by board members. Olivia stood alone for a moment, near a tall floral arrangement, catching her breath. That's when she overheard them. "She's sweet," someone murmured. "But does she know what she's getting into?" "She seems nice," another voice said, laced with that quiet condescension only wealth can carry. Olivia didn't turn around. She didn't need to. Instead, she looked across the room and found Liam's eyes already on her. He saw it, all of it. And when he returned to her, he didn't ask what was said. He just took her hand and, in front of everyone, kissed it. She didn't flinch. She stood tall. Because in that moment she realized something powerful. She wasn't surviving the room. She was owning her place in it. Not because of the dress, or the makeup, or even Liam, but because she was finally beginning to believe in her own worth. They danced again that night, slowly, close, a little offbeat, just like at the wedding, but different. Now she wasn't hiding. She was choosing. And when Liam leaned down and whispered, "I'm proud of you," Olivia didn't cry, but her heart did. Because no one had ever said that to her before. Not like this, not with love in every word. It was a Thursday morning when Liam showed up at the little flower shop on Elm Street. He arrived without warning. No black car, no polished driver, no security detail lurking nearby. Just Liam, in a worn grey sweater, dark jeans and sneakers that had clearly seen better days. His hair was a bit messy, like he'd run a hand through it one too many times, but his smile, that was as steady as ever. Olivia stood behind the front counter, surrounded by buckets of tulips, daffodils, and freshly misted roses. Her hands were covered in soil, and her apron smudged with green stains. When she saw him through the front window, she almost dropped the glass vase she was arranging. He stepped inside, letting the door chime softly behind him, the scent of eucalyptus and gardenias rising to greet him. "I heard there's a girl here who talks to flowers," he said, pretending to glance around the room. Olivia laughed. "You found her, but she's on break for the next 3 months." He grinned, walking closer. "Too bad. I brought coffee and 0 business proposals." She leaned forward, whispering with mock seriousness, "We don't allow men in overpriced sweaters before noon." He looked down at himself. This was $10. Liar. "Fine," he said, surrendering with both hands. It was significantly more than 10. The banter flowed easily, but beneath it was something more, a sense of peace, of arrival. Liam didn't look like a man visiting a different world. He looked like someone who had been trying to find his way home for a long time and had finally stepped through the door. He spent the next few hours there, not standing on the sidelines or scrolling through his phone, but working. He swept the floors, carried flower buckets from the back cooler, and helped Olivia rearrange the front window display. He didn't flinch at the mess. He didn't ask to be guided. He just jumped in. At one point, Olivia caught him watching her as she trimmed the stems of white peonies. "What?" she asked, self-conscious. "You," he said simply. "You're so grounded here, like you're part of the place." She smiled, a soft blush rising to her cheeks. "I guess I am." "I envy it," he murmured. Olivia paused, setting down the shears. "You envy me?" He nodded. "You build beauty with your hands. Every day. You make things bloom. I make spreadsheets and presentations. You also build homes, schools, programs. Through signatures," he said. "You create with touch, with attention. It's different." She didn't know what to say to that, so she didn't say anything. She just reached for his hand and placed it over a bloom that hadn't opened yet. "Press here," she said. "Gently, just for a second." He did as she said, confused at first. Then, slowly, the petals unfurled, coaxed by the warmth of his touch and the technique she'd learned over years. His eyes widened. "Did I just help it bloom?" She nodded. Sometimes all something needs is a little pressure in the right place. He looked at her then, and it was more than admiration. It was awe. Later they had lunch in the back room. 2 slices of pizza in a box and bottled iced tea. Olivia sat on an overturned crate, Liam on a step stool that creaked every time he moved. They talked about music, childhood pets, and her first job cleaning floral buckets at 14. "I've never laughed this much inside a room that smells like fertilizer," he said between bites. "Just wait till spring," she said, wiping sauce from her chin. "It gets worse." They both laughed, and in that small room filled with clippings and cardboard boxes, there was more intimacy than any ballroom or penthouse could hold. Before he left, Liam did one more thing that Olivia didn't expect. He walked up to Marta, the elderly woman who had owned the shop for 40 years and still came in twice a week to oversee things, and shook her hand. "Thank you," he said, "for creating this place." Marta looked surprised but nodded. "You've got yourself a rare one there," she said, nodding toward Olivia. "I know," Liam replied. "I'm just trying not to mess it up." When he kissed Olivia goodbye that afternoon, just a soft, lingering touch at the corner of her mouth, he didn't promise anything. He didn't make a grand gesture. But the way he looked at her, it said everything. He wasn't just falling for her, he was choosing her, not as a curiosity, not as a contrast to his world, but as the place where he finally felt like himself. It started with a headline. "Who is the woman captured on Liam Westbrook's arm at the Westbrook Foundation Gala?" And then, "Mystery florist, sparks talk of romance and risk for billionaire CEO. Too ordinary for the empire?" Olivia didn't search for them. She didn't need to. They found her, shared by co-workers in whispers, forwarded by a cousin with too many opinions, and eventually showing up on her own social media feed like shadows on a clean wall. The photos weren't unkind. She was smiling in most of them, standing beside Liam like she belonged. But the captions, the comments, those cut deeper. "She looks sweet, but she's clearly not from his world. This won't last. It never does. Enjoy it while you can, girl. That's not your reality." She tried to ignore them, tried to tell herself they didn't matter. But in the quiet moments, in the space between arranging bouquets and closing the register, her heart began to feel heavier. And Liam noticed. He showed up at the shop more often, his hands always full of coffee or pastries or a ridiculous story meant to make her laugh. But even his light couldn't stop what was gathering around them, the pressure. It wasn't just media attention, it was business. At a board meeting that Friday, one of Liam's longtime partners, Charles Granger, waited until the agenda was done before clearing his throat and speaking. "We need to talk about your public image." Liam leaned back in his chair, knowing exactly where this was going. Charles didn't waste time. "Your relationship with Miss Bennett has drawn attention, and while we respect your personal life, we have to consider the perception. Investors are watching. Mergers are sensitive. This could complicate things." Another partner chimed in. "We're not saying it's wrong, just ill-timed. She's lovely, I'm sure, but this is not the moment to gamble with optics." Liam didn't raise his voice. He didn't slam the table or storm out. He simply asked, "Are you finished?" And when they nodded, he looked each of them in the eye. "You're not talking about business," he said. "You're talking about her background, about her not being polished enough for your cocktail parties." "Liam, she's not a liability," he said, cutting them off. "She's the reason I remember why I do any of this, and if that makes anyone uncomfortable, you'll have to learn to live with it." The room fell silent. But outside that room, Olivia was fighting her own battle. It wasn't just the whispers or the headlines, it was the look in her co-workers' eyes, the change in how some customers treated her, as if her proximity to power made her unrecognizable, or worse, undeserving. One afternoon she stood in the back room of the shop, staring at the same bouquet she'd arranged every spring for years, a mix of wildflowers and lilacs, a tribute to her mother. But for the first time, her hands trembled. What if they were right? What if she was just temporary? A chapter Liam would one day rewrite. When he arrived at closing time that evening, she didn't greet him with her usual warmth. Instead, she sat across from him in silence, wiping her hands on a cloth that already held more petals than thread. "I don't know if I can do this," she whispered. He didn't react right away. just listened. "I'm not asking for pity," she continued. "I'm just tired of being stared at, measured, compared. I can't compete with the world you come from, Liam." He leaned forward, his voice calm but firm. "I never asked you to." She looked up. "But they do. Your world does." "And I don't care," he said. "Let them stare, let them whisper. I chose you. Not because you impress rooms, but because you change them." She shook her head. "Love isn't always enough." "No," he said, "but truth is. And the truth is, I'm not walking away." He reached across the table, took her hand and placed it over his chest. "Do you feel that?" he asked. "That's not business. That's not strategy. That's what I fight for." Olivia blinked back the tears she didn't want to shed. And then she asked the question that had haunted her for days. "What if one day you regret it?" Liam didn't flinch. "I won't." Not because he was certain of the future, but because he was certain of her. And that night, in the dim light of the shop she'd once built to hide in, Olivia allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, love wasn't about fitting into someone else's world. It was about building a new one together. The sky blushed in hues of amber and rose as Olivia stepped out of the car. Her breath caught the moment she realized where they were: the lake. The same secluded cabin, still framed by tall pines and silence. The same gravel path that crunched softly under her boots. The same glassy water, now reflecting the warm colors of an ending day. It had been 6 months since the wedding where everything began. And now, Liam had brought her here again. But this time, something was different. There were soft lights strung between the trees, tiny golden bulbs that twinkled like stars just beginning to wake. A narrow trail of petals led from the path to the edge of the dock, and in the clearing near the cabin, a wooden table stood beneath an arch of white blossoms. It was simple. It was quiet. It was them. Olivia turned toward Liam, who stood a few feet away, his hands in his pockets, eyes searching hers with that same quiet reverence he'd always carried. "What is this?" she whispered, though her heart already knew. He stepped closer, voice low, steady. "Do you remember what you said to me here?" She smiled faintly. "I said I thought I was falling for you. And I told you." He paused, emotion brushing the edge of his words. "You weren't alone." They stood for a moment in the golden stillness, nothing around them but the lake, the trees, and the gentle hum of the world exhaling. Liam reached into his coat pocket and pulled out something small. Not a velvet box, just a folded piece of paper. "I've spent most of my life making decisions for other people, for boards, for expectations, but every good thing in my life, every real thing, started the day I sat down at your table." Olivia blinked fast, trying to breathe past the sudden tightness in her chest. He unfolded the paper, revealing a pressed orchid between the creases. "The florist at your shop snuck this into my coat that first day," he said, eyes twinkling. "Said it would bring me luck," she laughed softly. "That sounds like Marta." She was right. He took her hand then. No dramatic speech, no rehearsed performance, just truth. "I want you beside me, Olivia, in every room, at every table, in every quiet moment and every loud one. Not as someone who followed me into my world, but as the person who gave me a reason to build something better." And then, slowly, Liam went down on one knee. A ring shimmered in his hand, delicate and timeless. Like her. Olivia's breath hitched. "I don't need the world's approval," he said. "I just need your yes." There was no music playing, no audience watching, just two people in a clearing by a lake, wrapped in light and memory. And Olivia, who once thought she would never belong anywhere beyond her flower shop and whispered hopes, nodded through tears and whispered, "Yes." Liam stood and pulled her into his arms, holding her like he never wanted to let go. They kissed beneath the trees, the lights above them flickering like tiny blessings. No cameras, no headlines, just love, unfiltered and whole. A year later, they stood in the same church where they'd first crossed paths. This time, Olivia wasn't sitting in the back or hiding at table 9. She was walking down the aisle, not borrowed, not background, but as the bride, as herself, and in every step, every breath, every smile, there was the quiet echo of all they had overcome. Because sometimes the most extraordinary love stories begin not with grand entrances or perfect timing, but with a seat at the wrong table and someone brave enough to stay. She never planned to be noticed. He never planned to fall in love. But somewhere between a quiet table at the back of a wedding and a kiss beneath the stars, they discovered that true belonging isn't about wealth or image. It's about being seen, chosen, and loved for exactly who you are. Because sometimes, the most unexpected encounters become the love story we didn't know we were waiting for. If this story moved you, leave your like, subscribe to the channel, and share in the comments. From where in the world are you listening? Your support is the heartbeat that keeps stories like this alive.